Hey, this is Robert Thibodeau, MayflowerBookshop.com on the internet. That's my website. And today, I'd like to explore a deeper look at The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky. At the end of Blavatsky's life, she was worried that people weren't going to understand her. I mean, Rudolf Steiner stated that Isis Unveiled was a book written by Christian Rosicrucian through her hand. Rudolf Steiner elsewhere actually mentioned that Christian Rosicrucian is an experience that we have an opportunity to experience between our lifetimes. In other words, our last death and this birth, in that unbornness, in that apparent nothingness, that selflessness that sees it all. And to have a sense of self at all there, one would have to be attuned to the central spiritual Son, the Christos, the second person of the Trinity, the solar archangels, the Michaelic or the Christos, what they call the Messiah that cleans up the mess. And yeah, I'm making a joke there because the thing is that unless each of us as individuals come to an understanding that sparks our imagination for the good, true, and beautiful, and inspires us to further uplifting action, and eventually even the ability to intuit who we are, who each other is, to intuit the spiritual beings and intelligences of all life. Okay, I'm getting lost here a little bit, but we need to put ourselves into action to prove ourselves in the proving ground of the earth. So I want to talk about the voice of the silence. Blavatsky thought that nobody was going to understand her, even though Rudolf Steiner, I think he might have, and continued it. And perhaps is a real theosophist, right? And then Gandhi read The Secret Doctrine, and Martin Luther King, Dr. Goodhart. A lot of people read The Secret Doctrine. I think Elvis Presley even. Like so many people that it would take hours to list, that they tried to figure out the true meaning of initiation, the true nature of the self, the true nature of selflessness and calm abiding space. So Blavatsky got freaked out at the end of her life that she wasn't going to be understood. And so she wrote The Key to Theosophy as a logical, easy to understand, simple, illuminating text for what is immortal and what's not immortal, and the insights of reincarnation and karma, and the true healing of the soul via the spiritual leavening. And she wrote The Voice of the Silence for the intuitive heart. I hung out with the Dalai Lama quite a bit at one point. And although I couldn't get all the other lamas to admit it, but I did kind of. The Dalai Lama totally admitted that The Voice of the Silence by H.P. Blavatsky is a solid, good treatise on the Mahayana prajna paramitas. The Maha being the great, the prajna being the grasp of everything and the sense of selflessness. Mahayana, the great vehicle, the great mind, heart stream, body. Mahayana. Prajna, the wisdom of emptiness, and creating out of nothing, as Steiner talks about, or emptying the content of your perception into the silence, the emptiness, the stillness of mind, and the third part of the foundation stone meditation by Rudolf Steiner that I talk about elsewhere. And the Mahayana prajna paramita, the paramita is the virtue and beyond. Blavatsky often, right here in the Voice of the Silence, she talks about the inner God in 7 manners. In the Voice of the Silence, we come to the inner deity coming forth by day. And then we come to the 2 paths. The Voice of the Silence is put together in 3 parts. The Voice of the Silence, and then the 2 paths of the eternal versus the temporal. Or seeing the immortal in the temporal, and seeing the temporal grasp of the eternal in our perceptions until we have a third eye and a heart chakra and a will that stays in a working together situation. Spirit, soul, body, thinking, feeling, willing. Here, it's the Voice of the Silence, the 2 paths, and then the 7 portals. And the 7 portals are the 7 virtues that go into the trinity of transforming through spirit, through the principle of the oneness, primordial darkness, Father, and the universal mind, the nous or the Christos or the Christ, the Messiah, the Buddha, nature, mind. And the Holy Spirit, the spirit of the world, the anima mundi, and the divine feminine, Sophia, wisdom, action hero, that Artemis is 1/3 of. Okay, so when we go to the Voice of the Silence, Blavatsky says, "'Tis only then thou canst become a walker of the sky." This is Skywalker, this is before Luke Skywalker, this is before Star Wars. And this is probably where they got it from, this part. "Let not thy heaven-born merged in the sea of Maya break from the universal parent, the big soul, the universal soul, the anima mundi, but let the great mother, but let the fiery power retire in the inmost chamber, the chamber of the heart." Here's where Blavatsky, the inner chamber of the heart, called Brahma Pura, the fiery power of kundalini, the power of the world mother, are names given to the kundalini. This is in the cave of the heart. Of course, Steiner talks about the kundalini in the early editions of Way of Initiation and Initiation its results, which later becomes, knowledge of the higher worlds and its attainment. But here, the power of the world mother, the yogic mystic powers. The buddhi considered as an active instead of a passive principle. It's not just, I'm spiritual, I love everybody, I wish the world was at peace. This is kind of an active compassion that enters into compassion with teeth that's helping others to help themselves, and educating the poor in the mind, heart, soul to be making their contribution and giving their gift to the earth, and loving the earth and divining the divine in each person. This is what it's all about, is trying to be a participant in the whole of one's life and the whole of the earth evolution, which in the Rosicrucian myth reality is that you start to come to understand what Blavatsky introduced and Steiner elucidated, the 7 earths, related to the 7 chakras and the 7 virtues. We were never meant to be denser than the fragrance of a flower. We're made of virtues, and the virtues open the chakras and protect the chakras, rather than just opening the chakras through some kind of materialistic, even though it's subtle, visualization. We open the chakras through virtues, and that protects us. So the whole idea of educating the animal appetites, the fear and the negative so-called sins, when we act out of separateness, we're trying to act out of togetherness. And each of us as an individual learns to have an individual gift that blesses that unifying principle of hidden life and light and love and awakened mind, heart, mind, to enter with a spiritual will into the world, as the foundation stone meditation by Rudolf Steiner so well indicates. Rudolf Steiner knew that the Anthroposophical Society was in trouble and the Anthroposophical movement was in trouble. Those are two different things. And they were meant to mirror or activate society and the spiritual soul of the world. And so here Blavatsky's, and the whole idea is to transform the lower astral, the lower soul desire, into the higher astral, or the angelic virtues and the paramitas, and the awakened higher consciousness. And so on one hand, we have the Christian Rosicrucian purification through this greater understanding of the 7 chakras and the 7 earths. But we also have the Michaelic cosmic intelligence, that as we purify ourselves and take right action or try to see if we matter in the world, that virtue and spiritual soul matter, to a degree that we take positive steps, every step we take, an angel or a higher virtue assists us and helps us. So we're at a place where the angels and the higher spiritual hierarchies, they don't just come and help us and give us free gifts. And we're at the 4th earth evolution, the 4th round in theosophy. And we're at a place where we need to make the turning point in time and kind of reverse the wheels, where we're going to stop barking and complaining. Right, Jazzy? Gonna stop barking and complaining? And we're going to raise ourselves by our bootstraps, or our spiritual will, our divine proclivity, and our virtues. And so Blavatsky here in The Voice of the Silence is talking about the World Mother and the kundalini and the buddhi considered as active instead of a passive principle, which is generally, when regarded as passive, it's just a vehicle or casket of the Supreme Spirit, the Atma, or the Spirit Man, as Steiner calls it. Remember, dog is God backwards. Like, the dog and pussycat, the feelings, the lower feelings and emotions of the lower intellect. The dog is kind of like the lower intellect, and the pussycat is the lower feelings, and the higher astral is the feeling for the arts and music and harmony and love. Yeah, harmony and love. So the Atman, or the Atma, the spirit man, I want to remind you that manas is the thinking principle, the universal mind, nous of Plato, Hermes, it's like the messenger, the Michael. And manas is that. So womanas, manas, man. So we don't want to get lost in terminology. The words can really mess us up and separate us. And so we need to find a unifying principle, but also something that will illumine and enlighten us in our way. So this kundalini is an electro-spiritual force, a creative power, which when aroused into action can destroy or create. It's like the secret behind the anabolic and catabolic. To be healthy, we have to have a balance between what's building us up and what's breaking us down and getting stuff out of the way so we can become spirit. It's a balance. And in Steiner's last book on healing with Ida Wegman, he makes a big case of this balancing of anabolic, catabolic, which in macrobiotics is yin-yang balance, acid, alkaline, sodium, potassium, the balance between overexpanding and overcontracting. Lucifer and Ahriman are Christianized terminologies from Persia. Blavatsky has a couple articles on Ahriman and electricity that are very interesting, that you wonder if, you have to wonder that, I mean, obviously Steiner read those and carried it a little bit further. So Kashara, or the skywalker, or the goer, is that king of mystic works. The dhyana shavari, the body of the yogi, becomes as one formed of the wind, as a cloud from which limbs have sprouted out. So in other words, we get limbs in our cloudy mind, and we fly, excuse me, I'm trying to clear my throat to say something important. We fly to the sun, but we eventually become a sun, a spark. And this kundalini is the relationship of the Great Mother to the birthing of the solar logos within our own heart, and uniting with, through the workings of Michael and Christian Rosicrucian, to the Christos. Other times they call it the Krishna or the Mithras, the Apollo. You know, the Apollo, the only begotten son who slays the serpent or the dragon. And this is a common motif that has a modern language that Rudolf Steiner tried to put it in, that's suitable for our modern times and a little bit easier to understand for a lot of people. So this cloud which limbs have sprouted out in wings, the yogi beholds the things beyond, this is Skywalker, beyond the seas and stars, beyond the water and the fire, right? He gets that, but he also goes beyond. He hears the language of the devas, or the angels, the devachan, and comprehends it and perceives what is passing even in the mind of an ant. So Blavatsky, voice of the silence. 'Tis only then when thou canst become a walker of the sky, who treads the winds above the waves, whose step touches not the waters, before thou settest thy foot upon the ladder's upper ring and rung, the ladder of the mystic sounds, thou hast to hear the voice of thy inner God in 7 manners. So here's like kind of the chakras, and there's a lot of ways to see this, but we could start at the bottom. We could imagine the Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth, Venus, Mercury, Sun. We could imagine the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Earth, Moon, and the 5th, Mars, 6th, Jupiter, then Saturn. You can see it any way you want, but let's imagine the physical. You see the inner God in 7 manners. Here's Blavatsky. The first is like the nightingale's sweet voice, chanting a song of parting to its mate. Then the second chakra, from the physical to the etheric, the second comes as the sound of a silver symbol of the Dhyanis, the archangels, awakening the twinkling stars. And I think that Michael and the other archangels are very much working out of the etheric cosmic. Okay, so we go to the third step. The next, this is the astral plane, perhaps Mars, where Buddha, Christian Rosicrucian asked Buddha to help bring peace to that Mars energy. So we can go through the Earth evolution and get to the Mercury, Venus, right? So Mars, astral. The next is as the plaint melodious melody of the ocean sprite imprisoned in its shell. And this leads us to the 4th chakra and the heart, the earth, maybe the earth moon. And this is followed by the chant of the veena, an Indian stringed instrument like a lute. So here we are in the 4th level, and we're experiencing the part of us that's oceanic, that's imprisoned in its shell. Osho said that he experienced the ocean of understanding and bliss and intelligence, and that's why he called himself Osho. Then we go to the 5th, And this is followed by the chant of Vina. Oh, that was the fourth. Then the fifth. The fifth, like a sound of a bamboo flute, shrills in thine ear. I mean, this is truly the fifth. The bamboo flute is the central channel, the middle pillar, the selfless emptiness that connects, the selflessness that can connect heaven and earth, the representative of man that lives within us. We need to build an inner Gurtianam, and we need to learn to see the outer Gurtianam everywhere we look. And this bamboo in the Mahayana, Vajrayana Tantric Yogi, they know that the bamboo is a very important step to universal understanding. And it takes a certain amount of selfless knowing. And if one, there's a difficulty if one goes out the bottom or out the top. This is like a Lucifer harmonic, being too spiritual, too materialistic. And that one has to hold this selfless connection, as above, so below, in the Egyptian Hermetic, on earth as it is in heaven, the Christian metamorphosis of that Egyptian Hermetic. And then Rudolf Steiner's mystery school reflection that we need to awaken within, the representative of man. That was a statue carving that he made to go in the first Gurtianam, but the first Gurtianam was burnt down. And so as you went through the seven earth evolutions and the different purifying colors, starting with the red window when you enter the first Gurtianam of the Michaelic intelligence and courage, and the purification of our astral body through spiritual fire. That's the kundalini, right? And then we move up to the word that brings us into the theatrical drama reflected in our spiritual souls, but awakened in our activity. You know, we enter the Gurtianam, and at some point we make the turnaround and we come back. We come back. That's interesting, but that's another conversation. So the sixth level, from the bamboo flute, it changes next into a trumpet blast, which brings us to either Mercury or Jupiter or both. And and this is an indication of the revelations, which Rudolf Steiner talks about in the book of Revelations to the Christian community priests and elsewhere in his Apocalypse lectures. The seventh and the last vibrates like the dull rumbling of a thundercloud. And that's a return to the first round vibration and the sun or Saturn, depending on involution or evolution. The seventh swallows all the other sounds. They die and then are heard no more. When the six are slain at the Master's feet are laid. When the six are slain and at the Master's feet are laid. This is Blavatsky from The Voice of the Silence. Then is the pupil merged into the one. Becomes that one and lives therein. Before that path is entered, thou must destroy the lunar body, cleanse the mind body, and make clean thy heart. That's the purification of the astral realm. Eternal life's pure waters, clear and crystal. Crystal being an indication of Rudolf Steiner's indication of Christian Rosicrucian, being crystal clear and purified. The six principles, meaning when the lower personality is destroyed or transformed alchemically, compost it. And it's reminded of Rudolf Steiner saying that you have to compost he said you have to destroy your biography if you want to be initiated. I would say that you have to compost it. I talk about this in other talks. So the 6 principles, meaning when the lower personality is composted and the inner individuality is merged into and lost in this, or found in the 7th or the spirit. You're one with Brahman and Atma. The astral form produced by the kamic desire principle, the kama rupa, the body of desire, is transformed into the first, the astral or personal self is secondary now to the individuality or the reincarnating ego, whose consciousness on our plane or the lower manas has to be paralyzed or transformed into this higher. Everybody has different words for it, but this can awaken the mystic power and transform one from a lenu or a moon reflecting the light to this self, this spark of sun in matter, the self of spirit that arises. So I wanted to share with you the first part of the Voice of the Silence. And in the next 2 recordings, I'm going to share with you the 10 indications in the 2 paths section. I want to share with you, if I find time, the place in the 2 paths where Blavatsky talks about the 7 and the 3, the 10. She says, "Tell him, O aspirant, that true devotion may bring him back the knowledge. That knowledge which was his in former births and between births, the angel vision, the deva sight, the angel hearing," head and heart, right? The heart is the 3rd ear and the 3rd eye, concentrated above your nose and your forehead, is the angel seeing. The deva sight and deva hearing are not obtained in one short birth. You have to build yourself up to this, which we're trying to do now because the world is in need of us awakening our angelic and our Christian, the rose of the Rosicrucian in our heart and the angelic intelligence. So Blavatsky talks about these 10 steps. Be humble if thou would attain to wisdom. Be humble still, ye even still your humbleness, when wisdom thou hast mastered. Be like the ocean which receives all streams and rivers. The ocean's mighty calm remains unmoved, it feels them not. That's the 3rd. The 4th, restrained by thy divine, thy lower self. Now again, Kabbalistically we would say the first one is Malkuth, earth, and the second one is the moon, a single thing, right? Be humble still, when wisdom thou hast. When we're climbing the tree of life in the Kabbalah, that 3rd step is 2 on the right and left. Be like the ocean which receives all streams and rivers. The ocean's mighty calm remains unmoved, it feels them not. And restrain by your divine, your lower self. This is definitely physical etheric and now, an indication of the astral purification. And then we get to Tipurath, and in my book, Rosicrucian Hermetic Grail Tarot, I talk about the Kabbalah. And it looks like 10 emanations, but it's really 7 steps going up. 7 steps horizontal going up. 7 steps you step on are more horizontal, right? But we're going up this threefold ladder of the Trinity. And in that place where the sun is, where in my understanding in my book, it's the lovers or the devil card and a need to deal with good and evil and love and separateness and make them kind of come to a higher place. And that's where we restrain by our higher self, the lower self. Then we go to the lower manas, which is 2 spheres above the center of the Kabbalah. And we find the 5th step here, restrain thy eternal, restrained by the eternal, the divine. And number 6, yes, great is he or she who is the slayer of desire. And then we go to the 7th, which is, in my understanding, the Great Mother and the Moon, the mother of the higher and lower worlds. We actually went, be humble, and then the physical, be humbler still, the etheric, then be like the ocean, receiving all the streams, and restrain thy divine by thy lower self, which is the astro. And then the Tiphareth, restrained by the eternal, the divine, which is the lovers and the devil card transformed. And then we go to that lower manas, trying to reach for the higher manas, on this side of the abyss. Great is he who is a slayer of desire. Still greater he in whom the self-divine has slain the knowledge of desire. So that stillness that even goes beyond even knowing all this. And then then you have the Great Mother and the Lesser Mother. Guard thou the lower self, lest it soil the higher. And you have the higher manas as the way to final freedom is within thyself. Whereas the higher manas, the Sophia Mother, is invisible as a replacement for the abyss and death. It's the Great Mother, it's the rebirth. And then you have the 2 at the very highest place, cherubim and thrones, you might say. At the oneness at the top is the seraphim, love, and then the cherubim is the harmony, and then the thrones is what's going to provide a subtle form. And in that case, we have guard thou the lower, lest it soil the higher, and the way to final freedom is within thy higher self. And then you have Kether at the very top, the ultimate alchemy and philosopher's stone, the alchemistical union of the world soul with the Fool in the tarot cards in my book. That way begins and ends outside the self. Outside meaning the personal self, outside the personal self. That way begins and ends outside the self because it's the world. One has a world conception. Rudolf Steiner is really big on this idea that anthroposophy, the wisdom of manas, needs to have spiritual thinking that enters into, like the impulse of Christian Rosicrucian is a spiritual mind for the triple soul and the triple deity, you might say, the Trinity, and the triple physical, emotional, mental, or thinking, feeling, willing. That Rudolf Steiner's Christology and Rosicrucian ideal is that Rosicrucianism is to understand that we're on the 4th earth and there's a Trinity left to go, and we need to transform the mineral, plant, and animal, and the physical, emotional, mental in the materialistic world. We need to meet it with spiritual knowledge, and spiritual knowledge is that we see the whole, the divine, in all matters, that we enter into the world. Tibetan Buddhism was meant to do this too, and so were certain parts of India with the elephant. The whole idea of the elephant, that you can be spiritual and you can be domestic and have a family or a garden or a job. You can live in the material world and the spiritual world simultaneously. And this is one of the goals of Rosicrucianism. And when you get caught up with the materialism of the world, That's where we need the Michaelic archangel intelligence that is acting, that everything we do, think, and feel is as if we're going to, in a good, true, and beautiful way, interact with 100 years or 350 years or 1,260 years. I mean, that we're acting our age, the spiritual age, of the Aquarian age of light and love and truth and harmony, the harmony of feelings with intelligence. So this is the Blavatsky, upraised by the manas and humble, is the mother of all rivers. Empty the human form, though filled with Amrita sweet waters, in the sight of fools. Fools might think we're nothing, but we're working with nothingness and virtue to create a sacred land within each of us and all around us. And this Arhat, Arhan, avatar, sage of the boundless vision appears. This superhuman insight and psychic perception, this seeing and knowing, awe, even at a distance, as well as on the spot. That we see the eternal in the temporal, this moment is the best moment that we could do anything. And yet we have this sense of this 7 earth evolutions, and we're on the 4th. It's very important to have that. That's the incarnational spirituality. And Blavatsky says, no Arhat or Lenu, spiritual student, becomes one in that birth when for the first the soul begins to long for final liberation. You have to become one with this bigger soul life. O you anxious one, no warrior volunteering fight in the fierce strife between the living and the dead. Not one recruit can ever be refused the right to enter the path that leads toward the field of battle. This is like Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna, the higher self, the Christ, leads the apostle. Krishna leads Arjuna between two mountains. I talk about that in another lecture, The Secret of the Bhagavad Gita, that we're between spirit and matter, or two mountains about to fight in the valley of the heart, and that we have to fight without fighting. The spiritual warrior. So, if you conquer, nirvana shall be yours. But you can even go beyond nirvana and not go to heaven and keep helping. This pregnant cause, Blavatsky calls it, the great and holy Buddha honor. It's really the Christos. And then, when it goes into the 7 portals, Blavatsky goes into the Mahayana prajna paramitas of Dhyana, is that it? The key of charity and love immortal. And this is the transcendental, physical, etheric, astral, ego, manas, buddhi, atma, right? The dhyana key of charity and love immortal, that we transform our physical world into compassion, charity, and an immortal love for many lifetimes until we're all enlightened, not just a lower astral pleasing each other here in the moment. And then the etheric is the harmony, the key Shila, the key of Shanti, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances. It's really Shila, then it goes into Shanti, right? They're similar in a way, but this is the etheric, the key of harmony in word and act, the key that counterbalances the cause and the effect, and leaves no further room for karmic action, like karma-free, right? And then the third is the astral, the kshante, the patience, not anger, the patience, not a velocity and being in a hurry, the patience that nothing can ruffle, the real love, as my song called Real Love says. And then the fourth is the ego, or the earth, the viraga, the indifference to pleasure or to pain, transcending opposites, right? But including walking through the opposites and marrying, like the Christ is crucified between the thief and the murderer, and Buddha talks about the middle way. So viraga, indifference to pleasure and pain. Can you understand? I mean, even to understand and listen to this will fan the flame into a spark. Fan the spark, not the fart. Fan the spark into a flame, and the flame into sparking the world around you. Viraga, indifference to pleasure and to pain. Purifying of the astral body, right? Into this birth of the ego, or the baby Jesus in the heart, the baby Buddha, the baby Krishna. Viraga, indifference to pleasure and to pain, illusion or separateness conquered, truth alone perceived. There's no religion higher than truth. There's no truth greater than science, the science of love. There's no greater art than activating love in one's daily life and one's eternal self with compassion and selfless daring to care for one's enlightenment process and everyone's enlightenment process. The fifth level, is a transformation of the Mars Virya, the dauntless energy that fights its way to supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. So this in a way is like, it's always two things, like it's reaching from the bottom up, but it's also the top down. Then the sixth level is dhyana, whose golden gate once open leads the saint or adept or the narjo toward the realm of Sat, eternal, and its ceaseless contemplation. Sat is the eternal. So we're moving from Jupiter, or the sun, to Saturn. Prajna is the seventh. Prajna is the key to which makes of a human a god, creating him or her into a bodhisattva, the son of the dhyanis, the universal soul of Alaya, giving birth to the Atmic. Before you can reach the seventh portal, of the seven portals, O weaver of thy freedom, thou hast to master these paramita virtues of perfection. The virtues transcendental, 6 and 10 in number, along the weary path. Here's a little bit of a mystery here I'm not going to resolve for you, but you want to think about it. These are 7 virtues that open the chakras, or are steps to the higher worlds, that connect heaven to earth, that transform earth, and earth to transform into heaven. And they kind of necessitate this idea of a self that wants to get enlightened, and a selflessness that is willing to learn. This is the key. And then in the voice of the silence, Blavatsky jumps, and she says that you have to live and breathe in awe, as awe that you perceive breathes in thee, to feel thyself abiding in all things in self. I mean, this is like Rudolf Steiner says, you have to see yourself in the world. If you see the world for real, you'll see yourself. And if you really, truly see yourself, you'll see the whole world. This relationship of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Blavatsky says, you shouldn't separate your being from the great being and the rest of you, or the silence, right? The oneness. But merge the ocean in the drop and the drop within the ocean. I mean, did Rudolf Steiner read this? Yes. And eventually you destroy the path between the higher and lower, and you are both a non-dual, armed with the key of compassion and love and mercy, and we're We're at the very gate. And she transforms death, into, like, there's a trinity of immortal body, and Blavatsky claims that you can't just disappear in heaven. That it's really important. That might be a little selfish. It's really important to it's important to have compassion for all those who suffer. So there's a big mystery here in me hanging out with Blavatsky, Steiner. I used to dream I'd visit Steiner, right? I don't know if it's real or not, but it inspired me to continue and gave me great hope in the face of craziness in the world. And I've hung out with the Tibetan Buddhists, and I really love those three schools working together that transform the etheric astral and the ego. I think that Christian Rosicrucian, the right understanding of the Rosicrucians, transforms death into immortality. And it transforms the etheric into a continuous mind stream of illumination and helpfulness to self and other. And the astral plane is purified with cosmic intelligence and a surrendering of personal desire for this Sophic purification, wholeness, mothering, and being mother to the divine in awe, and awe to thyself. And then the Christology of Rudolf Steiner is an attempt to birth the true reincarnating ego, the true mind-heart, the heart-mind stream that could continue and work with all life and intelligence. And this is the Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya of the triple immortality. We need all three. We need a trinity wherever we go, because a unity could lose us or lose another, and the duality is always at war. And so the trinity is this and that. I am this and that, and I'm that and this, and between everything and nothing, between the whole world mother and the silent oneness of the Great Father, is the birth of the middle way, the heart stream, mind stream continuum. I call it in my book, Astrological Aspects, the Art, and I call it that in the Rosicrucian Hermetic Grail Tarot book. Both books could use better editing, but both books I purposely didn't edit it so that I could reveal secrets that a more evolved student could kind of dig out and make use of. So, but I'm sharing it now clearly, so that the Dharmakaya is our sense of silence and emptiness and the father principle, and the Sambhogakaya is the bliss of the little kid or the reincarnating soul mind stream continuum, and the acknowledgement that we see the plan of the sevenfold earth, the seven bodies. There's 3 earths to go. We have a sentient intellectual and consciousness soul that yearns to be awakened with the higher universal mind and love and truth of the Atma Buddha Manas, right? And the Trinity, whether you call it Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, these are all just words. And so the Dharmakaya is to be a Christos Dharma agent for change that's selfless in our learning. And the Sambhogakaya is the joy we take in being part of the work, but we don't get attached to form. And the Nirmanakaya is the rebirth in the etheric wherever necessary. The Nirmanakayas are the Christ in the etheric, the Buddha that we can access, that's in our astral body, that's incarnated all the way to the astral body, whereas the Christos has incarnated all the way to the etheric. And I and the Father are one is that we're in this physical world. If you and I are just physical and we don't have these higher spiritual principles, it's a lonely place. You can be way cut off. And so you have to have this kind of sense of stillness that can decide or learn to find the oneness. be perfect like your Father in heaven. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. These esoteric injunctions, why didn't Jesus, the Christ, or the Christ Jesus, or the Christos on the fourfold cross, like Plato said, the world so is crucified in time and space within each individual. That was an indication of the same thing. And why didn't that fifth member on the fourfoldness call the mother to forgive? Because the mother is karma and reincarnation again and again until we get it right. And it's the joy of motherhood, divining the divine in each one of us and helping to midwife that. But the father principle is the nothingness, that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Like when we're just in the physical world and you don't have these higher proclivities of the son or daughter of God per se, and the world spirit and great mother. If you don't understand what I'm saying, and you're just in the physical world thinking that more money and guns are going to protect you, and control freaking and all that, then it's a little bit troublesome. And death looks very scary, and the loss of form and the change. Everything's changing all the time. The only constant is that everything's changing, and we get sick, and we get our identity gets attached to form, and we're separated, and we suffer the sin of separateness. Acting out of separateness causes suffering. And a lot of people feel separate, so they have to rediscover the Father and their oneness and their selflessness and the selfless willingness to learn. Now, I've said way too much. It's important to pause this conversation. And I'm right in the middle of some dentistry. So my mouth feels a little funny. So I've been talking, if I talk a little funny and you have trouble hearing me, or if I talk too fast, or if I'm saying things that aren't appropriate to whatever level we're at, forgive me, but I'm trying to share at the end of the world, unless we make a change really quick, I'm trying to share the little things we can do and feel and think that could make a difference in our life. And sitting up straight and meditating and wishing we had enlightenment, looking at our stillness and voyaging into the world through our mind or feelings or our actions with this sense of the fourth way, of death and rebirth, of the ego separateness into the greater sense of uniting with a universal thinking, a thinking that can hold us all in a divine plan, and a feeling that can come out safely to artistically and lovingly harmonize with the world, and a divine will to the good, true, and beautiful that we are. So meditating every day is important. Wishing our enemies to become enlightened. Wishing our friends to become enlightened, to be made whole, healthy, happy, healed, is to be made whole. Meditating in silence and listening with the third ear of our heart. Finding some beautiful, intuitive, inspirational, imaginative insight and concentrating on that with our third eye, our single eye. Jesus says, if thine eye be single, thy whole body will be filled with light. But light without love is a lonely place on the top of the mountain. So with that, I bid you adieu. This is Robert Thibodeau of Mayflower Bookshop in Berkeley, Michigan. I hope that every once in a while some of you make a donation so I can afford computers and time and all that stuff to keep putting out these things. And I'm making some interesting music. But if you feel like donating, mayflowerbookshop.com has a hookup to my PayPal at mflower@aol.com. But you can find that out online. And Mayflower Bookshop is in Berkeley, Michigan on 12 Mile Road, 48072 zip code. So my last thing I want to say is just, you got to meditate. And you got to try to eat good and take care of your body and exercise. And don't be afraid to learn new things. You don't have to act on everything right away. First there's theory and then practice. But we need to somehow awaken our mind and heart and our will in a new way. The world needs each one of us to discover our flowering gift, the gift that keeps giving and the gift that keeps returning with friends. Bless your heart. Hope to see you next time around. MayflowerBookshop.com. Robert Thibodeau at your higher self service.